Welcome to the Steve Barkley Ponders Out Loud podcast. As instructional coaches and school leaders, you are tasked with guiding continuous teacher growth to create student success. This podcast looks to support you with strategies from experienced guests, as well as my own insights that I've gathered over the years. I'm thrilled to have you with us. Thanks for tuning in. PLCs as achievement teams. Joining our podcast today is Steve Ventura, the lead consultant at Advanced Collaborative Solutions and the author with Michelle Ventura of Achievement Teams, How a Better Approach to PLCs Can Improve Student Outcomes and Teacher Efficacy. While I've followed Steve online and heard about his work when we presented at the same conferences at different times, we only recently met up over a few days at an instructional coaching conference. When I heard Steve describe his work with achievement teams, I was anxious to have him on our podcast. Steve is a former elementary and secondary teacher, as well as both a school and district level administrator, authoring several books and articles and providing ongoing professional development for teachers and school leaders. In the foreword to Achievement Teams, John Hattie writes, when Rick Dufour introduced PLCs, he was clear that they should relentlessly focus on fostering learning for all students, building a collaborative culture and collective effort to support student and adult learning, and continually improving practice. Too often, we wrongly consider just any group of educators meeting together as a PLC. We cannot afford the same mistake to occur regarding the notion of collective efficacy or achievement teams. Achievement teams are, at their core, about impact. End quote. I'm looking forward to this conversation on PLCs and achievement teams. Welcome, Steve.
Steve, thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
So, Steve, I entered my career in education from my student teaching through 10 years as a teacher working on teams at the classroom level, the grade level, and across the school levels. And that was before anybody was talking about PLCs, collaboration, or teacher collective efficacy. That experience has really forged my work across the last many years. So I was wondering, what led to your focus on PLCs and teacher collaboration?
It was just my previous experience doing a training called Data Teams. I was working with Dr. Douglas Reeves at the Leadership and Learning Center. And one of the flagship trainings at the center was something called Data Teams, which was a 6-step process for collaboration. And I was blessed enough to travel around the country doing that training, but it occurred to me, this was kind of pre-visible learning, a little bit of more about what causes an issue instead of just trying to fix it. You know, we went through this process. It was so heavily data-driven that no one really got an opportunity to reflect on practice because you could never finish the meeting with 6 steps. So when I started reading John's work, and then I started working with Corwin and learning more about visible learning from Hattie, I thought, my God, there were so many effect sizes we missed that we could have included in this protocol. And so Michelle and I said, how about if we just create something that's 4 steps, and every step can be related to some sort of high yield, high impact effect size, at least the probability that it would work. And that's how Achievement Teams was born. And it started off as 5 or 6 steps as well. But then the last iteration and the iteration that we included in the book was really more about teachers talking about their learning and less about the data, but we needed a base and evidence. And that was kind of the journey. That's how it came about. And then it just flowed like a well-oiled machine, like I'd been doing all these trainings. And I was like you, in my teaching career, we didn't have something structured like PLCs. We didn't even come close to calling them that. I didn't learn about this until I was an administrator. And so I was fascinated by it.
Well, so mine was reversed. I was doing it as a teacher and not knowing I was doing it because I just happened to land in the school that was built around it. So it wasn't until I began to consult and got into other schools that I discovered most teachers, actually in many cases, the teachers didn't even know what a team was. They had what I called they tended to work in franchises. They got
Yes.
together, exchanged some information, and then they all still went back and ran their own individual businesses. So I tell you, I like the term achievement team over data review meetings, because I haven't found the data review meetings to to do much. So tell us what the description of an achievement team is.
Well, it's so funny because when you and I spoke before, you said some things to me that just made me feel like, wow, I'm really on the right course here. Because when we were writing achievement teams, we wanted to create a collaborative protocol that focused on having teachers appropriate new knowledge about teaching and learning, not maintain existing knowledge. And we wanted them to sensitively challenge current thinking and practice. So, in these 4 steps that we put together, we wanted teachers to look at student data, but not for 60 minutes. We wanted them to look at a short cycle assessment results and then start looking at the root cause and making decisions about, well, if this is a pre post assessment, that's what it is. It's a pre post assessment
Mhm.
system. What would we learn from the first assessment if we were to give a mirrored assessment 2 or 3 weeks later? And most of it has to do with the practice, and looking at something we haven't tried yet. When I think coaches can help teachers increase their own self-efficacy, instructional coaches, and self-efficacy means people are willing to take more risks and try things they've never had before. They believe that they can,
Mhm.
improve practice this way. And so we were looking at a way between the pre and post to get achievement teams, to get teachers to really appropriate new knowledge, really think about, something they hadn't tried yet. And, many teachers are frustrated with student effort and the way they manage their effort, and even student motivation to learn. And I still maintain that I think kids can do all or many of the things teachers want them to do. I don't think it has anything to do with their cognitive ability. It may have everything to do with their motivation. So here we are again looking at, well, what do we do to increase engagement between a pre and post assessment, and how can we, elevate our own practice? So we thought the best part about an achievement team was the protocol, Steve, just a consistent protocol. So people didn't get off task. And we weren't trying to make it so disciplined that you couldn't have a good time while you were meeting.
Mhm.
At the same time, there was a beginning, middle, and end of this meeting, and it should tell you what to do next.
There's a sentence going through my head as I'm listening to you. It sounds like historically, when we looked at data, we tended to be looking at the students. And I
Yes.
think I'm hearing from you, we're looking at data to look at ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you for picking up on that, because what Michelle and I recommend for teachers with the pre post cycle is, why don't you teach first? You can teach as much as you want before you give an assessment, but teach those content and skills that you want to assess, and then give the assessment, because that data will reflect your effort. And so now you have something to talk about, like, wow, I taught that for 5 straight days and I only have 50% proficiency. So let's go back and refocus and see what we can do to get more kids to progress. And I think just think that this is a huge ability to reflect on practice, as opposed to putting kids in blue, green, yellow, and red.
Yeah.
And so that was it. Even though we have kids placed in proficiency groups, but it really is a reflection of the effort of the teacher.
I think you're touching on to this, but I'm wondering about the mindsets and beliefs that teachers have to develop in order to be team players on achievement teams.
Yeah, and you know that I've been heavily influenced, of course, by working with John Hattie in Visible Learning. And, we looked at the 10 mind frames from Hattie's work, and Michelle and I were looking at, well, what are the 2 mind frames that work best with achievement teams? And of course, you kind of hit on it. The first one is, our fundamental task is to evaluate the effect of our teaching on students' learning and achievement. That would be our fundamental task, is to evaluate our impact, our effect, not that the kids didn't try or they don't turn in their work. And number 2, the assessments and achievement teams are considered more of a reflection of the teacher's effort than the student's effort. And so with those 2 mind frames, we're really trying to shift focus on PLCs from the kids to the people who cause those results. And I'm not saying that teachers are responsible for kids who just put their heads down and don't exhibit any effort. But for the most part, we're talking about, did we cause that or not? And then what do we do to maintain it or fix it?
there's a word that's bouncing around when you say teacher effort, and I'm not sure what word would strike me clearer, because it could be that I put a lot of effort into the wrong strategy.
True.
So so the feedback I got is that I picked the wrong strategy.
Yeah, I think just when I look at this mind frame and the way I read about it, it was really the effort of the teacher and the strategies they choose to use, the way they deliver their lessons, and then they get it again with evidence, with an assessment, they get to actually evaluate their impact. So they don't have to guess. It would usually should tell them, did that instruction make a difference?
You brought me back now to the right word. So impact is really the word.
Yes.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So you write about 6 critical elements of achievement teams. You want to walk us through those?
Yeah. And it's funny because Steve, when Michelle and I were writing the book, there's a misconception about John Hattie's work that you go to the top 10 effect sizes and you pick those and you embed those in your school. And then all of a sudden you have a visible learning school. And of course, number one on his list, this is collective teacher efficacy. But what Michelle and I looked at was, well, but what effect sizes work well with this protocol that we've set up? So it's not 1 through 10. It's where that do they, and now all of them have an effect higher than zero point 0.4. Of course, we started off with collective efficacy because we wanted people to understand that, Goddard coined the definition of collective efficacy. He said it's the perceptions of teachers in a school that the faculty as a whole can organize and execute the courses of action required to have a positive effect on students. And so we thought, well, this is a great finding for a PLC or an achievement team. But then, as well as I do, that achievement teams use formative assessment and evaluation, which again has very high effect. And from those assessments, that was number two. Number one was collective efficacy. Number two was formative assessment. The third one was goal setting. And we discovered that goal setting actually has a huge impact on student learning for teachers and students. What we read was goals motivate students to exert extra effort in line with a specific task, especially if they create their own goals. So in achievement teams, there's a place where students look at their own pre-assessment results, get feedback, and decide how much more proficiency can I work towards. And so we included goal setting. That was the third of these 6 critical factors. So it's collective efficacy, formative assessment, goal setting. And then we looked at the research for feedback, which has a very high effect as well. And achievement teams incorporates 3 types of feedback for students: task, process, and self-regulation. And depending on how the students' results come back from the pre-assessment, the teachers would know what type of feedback to give that student. Not all students are self-regulated learners. Some are at the surface. And so we incorporated a feedback piece from the visible learning research. Next, we went on to response to intervention, which now may be called MTSS, multiple. So, it was published response to intervention, but we feel like the first cycle, Steve, the pre and post assessment, to me would be considered a multi-tiered system of support. Base one, you're looking at that to define like what are the actions we can take to improve this process. And then finally, the 6th one was teacher clarity. We did encourage teachers in the book to write learning targets and success criteria to use as the standard to be assessed. And so we called those 6 things the 6 super factors of achievement teams, which is collective efficacy, the assessment piece, goal setting, feedback, MTSS, or response to intervention, and teacher clarity. And they're not in the top 10, but they are very highly, they have high effect, right? So that's where the those effects come from.
It really organizes the plan.
Yeah. And as well as I do, we could have put another 10 in there.
Yeah.
But we thought, let's just say with 6 things. And then we kind of use that as our model to write, those 4 steps. And so that's how it was born.
I know that you also, as I read through, talk about learning progressions. And wondering if you'd explore that term a little bit further with us.
Yeah, sure. Another mentor of mine, Larry Ainsworth, who wrote, Common Formative Assessments and Unwrapping Standards. When Larry and I were working together at Corwin Professional Learning, one of Larry's flagship trainings was Common Formative Assessments 2.0, and he also wrote a teacher clarity session. And I noticed he had something in there called learning progressions. And I really loved what this was about. Steve, there's all kinds of progressions. There's a learning progression for a year of study, a unit of study. But in our book, a learning progression is called a micro chunk of it's a micro progression of one standard. So to put the big picture together, the teachers pick a learning target they want to assess. They write the success criteria for that learning target, and they also write the progression. In what order would they like to teach that standard? It could be from simple to complex, but it's just a roadmap, Steve. Like, for instance, if a standard said determine two or more central ideas in a text, the progression would be, well, let's teach students how to determine one first. If they can do one, then we'll add two, and so forth. So it's just a simple to complex order from lower level skills from the standard to higher level. At some point in time, you could use DOK as a clue, but it wouldn't be the only way that you would order your standards, because DOK doesn't have to be listed ones, twos, and threes. It could go anywhere from a 1 to a 3 to a 2, whatever that is. But that was the whole purpose. We thought it was a sequence of instruction from simple to complex. And the progressions also identify prerequisite skills. Before the teachers start teaching how to determine the central idea of a text, what are the prerequisite knowledge that the kids need, prior knowledge? And it is a chunk of instruction, just one chunk after another. And if you look at it, Steve, if a teacher writes a 6 or 7 step progression, they've already written the assessment. Literally embedded there is their formative assessment. And progressions can either allow teachers to accelerate instruction or decelerate, depending on what they see the kids are. So again, we know there are several definitions of progression, from a whole year to a unit. This is a little micro, going from a floodlight to a flashlight. Here's one standard. Let's write a sequence of steps for that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm hearing that it gives me the look fors as I'm progressing through the unit. So
Exactly.
I know I can go on to the next step based on what I'm seeing the student do, or I shouldn't go on to the next step yet, because I'm not seeing this progression that goes to the next one.
Great observation. So when we have maybe 80% mastery, or we know our kids can do this, progressions can't be done in one sitting.
Yeah.
Especially with some of these standards, with all these skills. So, at least the teachers have a roadmap. And when they get to the 6th or 7th progression, they've actually taught that standard pretty deeply. And all of a sudden we can start assessing.
So my next question is probably deep enough for a whole podcast. Yeah. But we're touching on it a little bit here. What is it that we've got to learn about assessment in order to build the impact of achievement teams?
Yeah, so many misconceptions about formative assessment. I was reading something from Julie Stern, who wrote, she does a lot about transfer learning. And Julie said she stopped calling them formative and summative assessments because kids kept asking, does this count? And she said, no, I'm using this language like ongoing assessment as formative, and then end of unit assessment as summative. And we have a difficult time, and some of our clients do, of really understanding the difference of those two. Our big thing with formative assessment and evaluation is that the assessments for achievement teams should not be graded. This is a big challenge, because we've conditioned kids to do anything for a grade. And we're trying to help teachers understand, no, you don't want to grade that first assessment. You want to use that as feedback so you can improve practice. You can certainly tell the kids how they did and give them feedback, but we want to help people understand the difference between those two. And lots of different arguments about formative and summative assessment, but we call them short cycle assessments, Steve. They're 5 or 7 items that the teachers want to quickly assess from a targeted skill, just to determine where are these students, and then how to make decisions based on those results. So we don't really talk about summative that much, but John Steak said, when the guest tastes the soup, that's formative assessment, because when the chef tastes the soup, it's formative assessment, because you don't get the soup until it's good. That's the pre-assessment, right? Yep. Then I'll serve it. But when the guests taste the soup, that's summative. Yep. And so we use that model. I know John used it, but we cited John Steak with that. But formative assessments are really a no-fault reflection on both the students and the teacher's practice, and they're used simply to inform so we can make better decisions about teaching and learning. And I think that they could be hugely political, but ours are so simple. Just give a pre-assessment on a specific learning target and see how the kids did.
So, Steve, many of the listeners to this podcast are instructional coaches and building principals. So, I wondered if you talk a little bit about the role that you see them playing in supporting achievement teams.
It's so funny, Steve, because I'm writing another book for ASCD. This is not a shameless plug. I don't even know what the title is. I've got 7 chapters done. We don't even know. I just have this chapter about how to coach PLCs for leaders and coaches, which I consider both. And some of the things that I've read from you and heard everything else. I mean, your statement to me had a profound effect when you told me, because we quoted you in the chapter about that, what the real purpose of a PLC is to get teachers to ask themselves, what do the kids need to learn? And I think with that baseline, coaches can have a huge impact. When you and I met at instructional coaching conference, I outlined 4 effect sizes for coaching, which range from learning attitudes to self-efficacy beliefs to skill acquisition and teaching practice. I mean, you couldn't write a better job description for an instructional coach, and all of these have very high impact on the probability that they would work. And here's my thinking with coaching right now. I don't know how you feel about it, Steve, but sometimes coaches facilitate PLCs because they're just really amazing facilitators. And I wrote about that. I mean, it's something that coaches do really well. Or sometimes they may want to focus on a specific aspect of PLC. And in our area of achievement teams, we would have them help improve teaching practice. So after the data is analyzed and the teachers are searching for new opportunities, the coaches intervene and say, let me show you what would work between a pre and post. Remember, we talked about learning labs? I mean, this is the perfect place to let teachers experiment with some micro teaching. I think coaches should be doing micro teaching anyway, where it's just a small group of students with a short lesson, 10 or 12 minutes. And that's where we rehearse the next strategy that we want to use. So coaches can just literally double the speed of progress for PLCs. They can just do about anything. I don't know how you feel about it. I think that the facilitation piece is amazing. And then they kind of pull back from that. And then they focus on, now let me really show you how to acquire more skills and more teaching practice.
Jim Knight and I recorded a podcast together where we looked at this question about instructional coaches and PLCs. And I think Jim used the description first that coaches went into PLCs to teach people how to facilitate and never came back out.
That's it. And it's funny, we're acutely aware of that because we don't want them just to show teachers how to lead a meeting. We want them to actually show teachers how to improve practice, which is what their job is.
And so then the issue becomes time. So if I'm in an elementary school and the instructional coach is facilitating all the PLCs, that knocks one major chunk out of their time that they then can't be doing the piece that you're talking about, which is getting more invested. So, but at the same time, somebody's got to make the investment to teach teachers how to function in that setting, and that is an important role.
Yes. And we have, Michelle and I have written what's the success criteria for each one of these steps for achievement teams? Like if you did this, you had a good step 1. So we put together little rubrics, like make sure you have these things checked off, quick little checklist. But I agree with you. I mean, I'm watching coaches get asked to do things that they never thought they were going to be asked to do. Yeah. And where their heart is to actually help teachers acquire more skills and improve teaching practice. And I think that would be the best place for them to be on a PLC.
I like to see the coach coming into the PLC as an invited expert.
Exactly.
We ought to send the coach an invitation to be at our next PLC And so, coach, before you get there, here's the piece we're struggling with. So whenever
Yes.
you could come in to join us in this, the concern I have sometimes is that if we leave the facilitation hanging on the coach, then we can end up having a not effective meeting as a group of teachers, and put that responsibility for the meeting not being effective back onto the instructional coach, where we really have to be as all of us sitting around the table, needing to take ownership in that.
Great. It's a great observation. It's the truth too. We could, even adults experience learned helplessness. And if we
Yeah.
ask somebody else to facilitate, all of those things for us. So I just was, thinking heavily about this when you and I first talked about, like, what is the role of a coach? And they would slowly be to, I mean, not slowly, but I mean, a lot of different things. But my least favorite thing for them to do would be to facilitate the meeting.
Yeah.
Not that they wouldn't crush it. It would just be like, I think there's so many more things they can do that would add value than just model
Yeah.
a PLC.
So before we wrap up, I'm wondering what question I should have asked you that I didn't, to be sure that people are getting the strongest message about the power of using the achievement team approach.
Well, the last thing I would address is just what is the leader's role? And when I talk about leaders, could be lead teachers, coaches, administrators. But if I just focused on administrators who want high functioning PLCs, they wouldn't sponsor that for the rest of the faculty. They would actually lead that and sit in with that and watch how it's working. I can tell you, Steve, and you probably know this, a PLC is going to live or die based on how it's led. And if it's not led, which means the administrators, the principals, the leaders are not giving feedback to the people that are actually doing this, they start wondering, well, why are we putting all this effort and investing this energy when no one ever tells us what a difference we're making? And no one ever gives us feedback about how well we're collaborating. I think that our principal friends and leadership friends should not be sponsoring learning. They should be learning with teachers in this process. And they again could sit at a PLC, not as a facilitator, Steve, but as an invited guest to help find solutions. I just think that this is a huge initiative. Again, when schools take it on, I usually tell my leadership friends, you got to have to get out in front and live the culture you want everyone else to live. You're just going to have to do that. Otherwise, you may look at this as a partially implemented initiative, which means it's no better than doing it at all. So that would be the last thing.
So would you buy my line connected to that? Is that similar to an instructional coach in a building being an investment that's been made that the principal is accountable for?
Yes.
So the
Yes.
effective use of the instructional coach, that's an investment in your building. I look the same way with the time you're giving teachers to be in a PLC. There's an accountability that as an administrator, I'd need to be able to feel strongly that that was a good investment of teachers' time. And I don't know any way to do that other than knowing what it is that's happening and supporting what it is that's happening.
Exactly. And I was writing like the principal partner with a coach is so huge because it models trust and shared values, supporting a positive coaching environment. And I just think so much, our administrators can learn so much from these 5-star instructional coaches who are all in. Most coaches don't become coaches because they want to be passive. They literally are active. Like they want to get their hands dirty. They're incredible. So no, that was it, Steve. I just enjoyed this so much. But the leadership piece to me is huge. And you work with plenty and So that's where the money is sometimes in terms of implementation.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure, Steve. And I'm wondering what's the best way for listeners to follow up with you and follow along with the work that you're doing.
Sure. We are at steveventura.com. The website is updated. We're actually going to be launching a new one soon, but it's steveventura.com. There they'll find a lot of resources about achievement teams. There's so many downloads and resources. They're all free, including our instructional strategy flip book and other things. So steveventura.com. And on that page is how to email me, You can call me directly. All that information is there.
We'll post that in the lead into to the podcast. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks again. Hope to do it again.
Thanks for listening, folks. I'd love to hear what you're pondering. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn at Steve Barkley, or send me your questions and find my videos and blogs at barkleypd.com.